My name is Timothy Alberino, and this is the after-action report and analysis of my expedition into the Amazon jungle of Peru, where I investigated the alleged alien attacks and face peeler phenomenon of recent internet fame. Let's begin with a brief review. Some months ago, near the end of July, compelling videos began to surface on social media featuring an alleged alien attack in a remote jungle village called San Antonio de Pintuyacu, which is inhabited by the indigenous Iquitu people and located deep in the Alto Nanay region of the Peruvian Amazon, northwest of Iquitos. The video depicted an alarming scene in which the men of the village were in a state of panic, discharging their firearms into the jungle in the dark of night. Subsequent interviews with the Apu, or chief of the village, revealed that mysterious assailants were making incursions into the village and had attempted to abduct a 15-year-old girl. The girl, whose name is Talia, was able to scream during the altercation with her assailants and was fortunately rescued by her brother and her neighbors, who came running to investigate the commotion. Talia sustained a laceration in her neck and was in a state of chemically induced disorientation for some time after the incident. According to the Apu, whose name is Jairo Reategui, the assailants were arrayed in peculiar body armor with elongated helmets reminiscent of the Green Goblin from the Spider-Man movie, and were able to float through the jungle and lift off into the air. They seemed to be impervious to gunfire as they were shot at point-blank range to no effect and could seemingly disappear into the night. In the video, the Apu made the extraordinary claim that the assailants were not human beings but extraterrestrials, evidenced by their incredible technological capabilities, which seemed to defy a conventional explanation. The assailants were also described as Pelacaras, which translates into English to face peelers. The legend of the Pelacaras is well known in the Peruvian Amazon. I myself had heard of it some 20 years ago when I lived among the native people in a region of the jungle not far from Alto Nanay. According to the legend, strange beings would, from time to time, appear in the remote villages to waylay and abduct individuals who happened to be found alone at night. The corpses of these unfortunate victims would later be discovered with their faces partially or completely removed, exposing the bleached skeletal bone beneath. While many Peruvians associate the Pelacaras with gringos, there is no consensus among the indigenous communities in regard to their origin or identity. Some believe that they represent an international group of organ harvesters funded, perhaps, by cartels, while others maintain that they are non-human beings and even extraterrestrials. Descriptions of the Pelacaras vary to some degree in the legends. There are consistent details, such as the fact that the assailants always attack at night and have the ability to silently float through the jungle and fly through the air. Apart from the video which had surfaced from San Antonio, another video appeared on social media featuring an alleged Pelacara encounter in the city of Nauta, which is 2 hours west by road from Iquitos, the capital city of Loreto. The video, captured at night on a cheap smartphone and therefore dark, grainy, and low resolution, seems to depict an alien gray-type being, which is momentarily illuminated by a flashlight. These videos, as well as others, went viral on the internet and provoked much fear and trepidation throughout the jungle regions of Peru. The villagers of San Antonio, who were living in terror, earnestly petitioned the government to dispatch the Navy to protect them from the Pelacara assailants and to conduct a criminal investigation. But yes, and as I said earlier, some Peruvians associate Pelacaras with gringos, face peelers with gringos. I would say half of the people I discussed the phenomenon with believe that they're aliens, and the other half believe that they're gringos. And so, this naturally, if that's what she thinks, and she has a little bit of reason to believe that, and we'll get into that in a minute, then obviously our presence in the village would make her very nervous. So We were eventually able to interview Talia, this poor girl, at her house the next day. The Apu of the village, Jairo, suggested that we go to her house the following morning after breakfast. We did so, and her father persuaded her to talk with us. Now, if you recall, Doug, before I started to interview her, and before I started to interview her, she was extremely nervous, just like the previous day. But then after I asked her the first question, and it was simply, Talia, please tell us what happened to you.
Toma tu tiempo, yo sé que es difícil. It's extremely traumatized, this girl.
She just stood there and trembled, head to foot, trembled for probably a good 2 minutes, just stood there silent, trembling. She could not speak. Obviously something very traumatic had happened to her right there in the backyard where we were standing. And the assailants were my height, I'm 6'1", reminded her of the assailants because they were very tall. So what happened to Talia? What happened to this young lady is that one night, one evening, she was picking fruit from her tree. And this was right after dusk, so it just got dark. She's picking fruit from the tree. She's knocking the fruit down with this long stick, and the fruit falls to the ground. Talia proceeds to bend over and pick up the fruit that fell to the ground, and there are under the tree, there are some dead leaves, and suddenly she feels this gust of wind behind her. And the leaves, she notices, rustle. As she goes to pick up the fruit, she feels this gust of wind, and the leaves are rustling a little bit on the ground. And so she looks behind her, and what does she see? She sees a person coming up the hill, because the backyard is kind of a little gully. It's forested. There's some jungle there between the other houses. So it's this little gully. We have it on film. And she sees this guy, this person, this thing coming up the hill almost as if he's surfing on one of these circular platforms. And he comes up the hill and he lands next to her, and then immediately grabs her. He seizes her from behind, and he places his hand over her mouth. So he's got her from behind, and he's got his hand over her mouth so she can't scream. Then she sees another one of these guys coming on another platform up the hill and lands and positions himself in front of her and grabs her leg. So now she is being held by two of these Pelacaras, face peelers, one behind her with a hand over the mouth and the other has her legs. The description she gave me of these individuals is identical to what everybody else was saying to us. They were dressed head to foot in black body armor. She even described the body armor in greater detail than anyone else. She described how it was on the forearms and on the shins, and the chest was some sort of like a breastplate, metallic, and they were wearing these helmets, these large helmets, elongated helmets, that covered the entirety of their faces. So the very same description that everybody else gave to us, this is what Talia encountered. They were very tall. One of them, which she calls the gringo, was taller than me, considerably taller than me. The other, I think she said, was about my height, if I recall. That one I dubbed the Peruvian. The reason why is because, according to Talia, these individuals spoke Spanish. The taller one, she says, spoke Spanish like me, like a gringo with an accent, and the smaller one spoke like a Peruvian. And I specifically asked Talia, the Spanish that this individual spoke, was there an accent? Was it Ecuadorian? Was it Bolivian? Was it Cuban? Or did it sound like Peruvian? Did they have an accent? She said he sounded just like all of us. So I started calling this individual the Peruvian. So that's why I'm going to refer to them. The Peruvian face peeler and the gringo face peeler. We don't know if they're people. I'm not saying they're human beings. This is the testimony that Talia gave us there in her backyard. So these individuals have her in this manner, but they're hovering, mind you. They're hovering on these platforms, and they proceed to lift her up. Now, I don't recall, Doug, if she was telling us something about how she was speaking very, very softly. She was very nervous. She was telling us something about how they attempted to lift her off the ground, but couldn't. Somewhere in the course of this encounter, they were attempting to lift her off the ground, and for some reason, they were having a hard time. So they took her behind this hut that's there on the property. And then they proceeded to take out a powder. The Peruvian put some powder in his hand, and then he put some cream. He had this little bottle with cream in it, and he mixed the powder and the cream together. Then he took a nasal syringe, he sucked up the substance and shot it up her nose. Then they took out a larger tube, almost like, it sounded like, and I asked her, like, sort of like a large toothpaste packet, and they put the cream on their hands. And this was the guy that had her from behind. So recall, the gringo has her from behind. He's covering her mouth. The Peruvian has her by the feet. And the gringo proceeds to smear this cream all over her face. And she said that her face instantly went numb when the cream was applied, and it began to swell. And she even tells us that at that point she heard the Peruvian guy say, be careful, don't apply too much. You're going to ruin the flesh. And then she later explained that what she heard them saying was something about how if they apply too much, the flesh is going to stick to the skin when they take it off. Something along those lines. It wasn't exactly clear, but something like that. And then, and I may be skipping some minor details, and then they took out one of them took out a small device that you and I think is a laser scalpel, and they began to make an incision in her neck. In other words, they were very likely going to peel her face off, just like the legends say. At this moment, Talia began to struggle. She began to lift up the mask, the helmet of the guy behind her, the gringo holding her from behind. And as she was doing this, somebody, I think it was him, or if not the Peruvian guy who was holding her legs, one of them slapped her in the face. And when they did this, they dropped her. And this gave her a moment in which her mouth was no longer being covered, and she was able to scream. So she hits the ground, she screams. Her brother and her family members are on the other side of the house on the porch, sitting there outside. They have their flashlights on them. Talia's brother gets on the scene with his flashlight. The neighbors are up higher on the hill. They come down with their flashlights, and they all see the same thing. What they see are two individuals, these two individuals we just described, dressed in black, head to foot, very tall, hovering on these platforms, on these circular platforms. And Talia is lying there on the ground, bloodied up from the incision in her neck. Her face is swollen. And Talia says that at this moment, she heard the Peruvian face peeler say to the gringo, let's go, let's get out of here. And the gringo replied, no, we can't just leave her here. And according to Talia, he proceeded to grab her by the hair and try to drag her and perhaps lift her off the ground on his platform. The neighbors see this. They have their flashlights. They start to yell. And eventually the gringo drops her. And these guys maneuver themselves to where there's an opening in the trees. And they lift off the ground at a high rate of speed and disappear into the sky.
One of the things to understand here is that